more into the present. A simple exercise to help your mind and body relax is to notice what you are experiencing right now through each of your senses. Take a few slow breaths and ask yourself, what is one thing I can hear? One thing I can feel. One thing I can feel. One thing I can smell. One thing I can taste. Notice these slowly, one sense at a time, and feel completely present in this moment.
So these are the coping cards, like I said, that each of our students were given as part of this intervention. So I will pass these around. Don't have enough for all the tables, so just share as they go back. Okay, so what is Reining and Anxiety? So Reining and Anxiety is an adaptive riding program developed by a team of researchers, clinicians, and equine specialists through evidence-based therapies for youth with mild to moderate anxiety. We test piloted Reining and Anxiety as a manualized curriculum first at NYC Gallup with a partnership with NYU. It is an intervention of 10 modules based off of a research through PracticeWise, which is a database. So we looked at what are the key components of cognitive behavioral therapy. What does somebody with anxiety need to experience through cognitive behavioral therapy? And what are those key components that can be translated into the equine environment? And then how do we put that into adaptive riding? And came up with a module of 10 lessons. So the sheets that I'm passing around have exactly what those 10 lessons are in their structure. That was then developed into a manual. I will then pass those around too. I have lots of show and tell. I like show and tell. So we have the exact manual that was created by the team at NYU. This manual was first tested, like I said, at NYU, and there is an outcomes paper, a fidelity paper and an outcomes paper about the manual itself. That yes, this can be delivered by equine specialists, by us, not by mental health professionals. So it's a mental health professional who trained equine specialists to deliver this in the arena, and it was delivered with fidelity. And that youth with mild to moderate anxiety who engaged in this training did have reduction in their anxiety symptoms after the 10 weeks. So they said, okay, small pilot, significant findings, let's do a replication study. Insert Fieldstone Farm. So we had our team, Shelly included, who's back there, she can answer questions later if you'd like, go through this training. We had I believe it was 8 instructors, go through this training led by Megan Morrissey. And we had 4 predominant research questions. 5 actually, if we include the last one. So the first one being, does Reining and Anxiety garner consistent results from the pilot study? Right? Can we replicate the study? And I'll explain this one. Does the Center for the Study of Animal Wellness Scale reliably measure the rider's bond with the horse? So that's a very specific question that sounds like it's totally tangential, but because there is no measure currently for children that's of a children's age to respond to their bond, their perception of bond with a horse on a survey, I found a researcher at Tufts who had created one and modified dog to horse, and I said, can we use that, please? And so we added that as a research question, and we're able to validate a scale around child's perception of bond with the horse as part of this study as well. The physiological impact of therapeutic riding with cognitive behavioral therapy, this intervention for children with mild to moderate anxiety. So we looked at physiological indicators of cortisol, oxytocin, and alpha amylase in saliva collection. And then was it delivered, this entire intervention delivered with fidelity? Right? So those were the questions that we were looking at. The main reason that we partnered and that NYU sought us out, honestly, is because my research is actually in the physiological sciences. So I am a physiological social science researcher. I went to SPIT camp. I am trained Yes, I did. I am a spit researcher. I am trained through the Institute for Salivary Biosciences over at UC Davis in actually collection and analysis of saliva, and specifically a new saliva assay that looks at measuring oxytocin. And so my dissertation research was one of the beta sites for this methodology. We were then able to also utilize the site here as the next level to use that ELISA assay. So that was one of the key pieces, and that was really important to this research. Now, why is it important? Because if you've read the research, there have been calls for the integration, thank you, Molly, about inclusion of animals, right? That's what you all stand for, right? And so horses produce saliva that carries the fundamental physiological indicators the same as humans, cortisol and oxytocin. We can capture that in horses, we can capture it in humans, and we can see the stressors and change over time. So we're responding to people like Zini Ng and Esposito and, oh my gosh, Pendry, and I could go on and on, right? All of these key researchers, who was just saying like all of the key researchers in the field, right? We can actually respond to them and say, yes, we actually can do this in social sciences, now let's do it. In addition to that, there was a team, Contreras and Aguilar, who had just developed a method that was cost effective and easy to use. Does anybody have a camelback? Anybody use the tube of the camelback? Yeah, modified bit. So we took the tube of the camelback, right? Cut it, hole, there's a slit in the front. There are slits, not holes in the back. We used sterile gauze. And remember when we did our tour and I said those bitless bridles, right? We connect it just like the bit. And so we have the published paper up here that this bit, we did a pilot study of 8 horses to see whether or not it would collect enough saliva to test for the 3 analytes that we were looking for, and would it potentially reduce stress in horses? Because when do horses get swabbed, cheek swabbed? No, they do. When do horses get cheek swabbed? Colicking. When do they also get things shoved in the side of their cheeks? Deworming, right? When do they get a bit put in their mouth? Right. So maybe there's stress with riding, but it's a different kind of stress, right? So can we actually collect saliva without inducing stress? Yeah, we can. With this bit, we're able to collect enough saliva to test the analytes, and it does not statistically increase stress in a very small subset of horses. Okay? So the bit method is viable. We did need to adjust it, which was actually cutting the holes in the back. We found that it was too rigid at first, and if you put too many holes in it, the horses can eat it. I keep laughing at Nicole because we both had that happen. Further testing is always needed, so of course that's in there. And the modified bit is usable for measuring analytes to triangulate self-report and physiological indicators. So I can pass these around for you. I really love the show and tell thing. So far, any questions with everything I've thrown at you? We have a research team. We have a manual. We have a way to collect saliva. We have a unique and creative, innovative research team going on, right? So last January? One before? COVID. Ugh. One before? 2021. We actually got our whole team together, did a 3-day training, and then we launched. And between April and June, we had 39 youth with an average age of around 12, about 50-50 between boys and girls, go through our study where they rode for 10 weeks doing the, whoever has it, the 10-week sessions, right? They did a screening measure to get consented, parent consent as well, caregiver consent. There was an intake, right? So they had a full, at weeks 1, 4, 7, and 10. I was joking around that I was going to get a tattoo of 1, 4, 7, 10 on me. They did a screening question at the beginning and at the end, and 1, 4, 7, 10, they would spit in the tubes. We had a couple of students, I want to say it was 3, who due to their disabilities could not produce enough saliva to spit, and so for them we did an under-the-tongue swab, and we were still able to collect enough saliva and appropriate pooled saliva. So we did find that there was a significant difference in anxiety levels at post-test versus pre-test, session to session, not 1 to 10, session to session, so when they would come versus when they would leave, because we were taking saliva when they walked in the door and then before they left. So pre-test, post-test. What we didn't find is session 1 to session 10. I'll get to the why for that in a little bit, because I always think that's like the interesting thing. There was significant improvement in emotional regulation, teaching of emotional regulation skills. So that's that survey that we did at the beginning and the end. Children were able to self-report back skills and language around emotional regulation. There were no significant changes for self-efficacy. And I think that's interesting that the children were not relating anxiety and self-efficacy. So their ability to advocate or advocate for themselves was not tied to their anxiety, right? Which in a state of COVID and all the things that were going on actually kind of makes a little bit of sense of what was triggering their anxiety, what was going on, potentially. The second one around outcomes. Is this study a replication, a true replication? Do we have the similar findings from the prior study? Yeah, we sure did. It was awesome. We were able to replicate the 10 weeks with the intervention itself, like the true 10 sessions. We were able to replicate the measures that were delivered. We were able to replicate the population. All of those fundamental pieces were able to be replicated. We also were able to then include equine welfare, physiological data, and an international collaboration, which is just kind of cool. For the saliva from riders, that's where I get really nerdy and I love it, we did have significant change. You can see the p-values on the far side in alpha amylase, oxytocin, and cortisol. So oxytocin, how do you identify oxytocin? Love hormone. It's a relaxation. It's affiliative bonding. I love that. Love bonding, right? It's that like, feel good. Cortisol. Stress, but more than stress. What kind of stress? Huh? Distress. Chronic stress, right? Alpha amylase. In humans, alpha amylase. Any ideas? No? It's a surrogate indicator of stress. So it has other functions as well, but in humans, alpha amylase will tend to track with cortisol for stress. And so if somebody experiences sudden stress, right, a fall off a horse, you might have your alpha amylase tick up, right? If you have a really good lesson on your favorite horse and your oxytocin goes up, your your alpha amylase might go down, but your cortisol might stay up, right? We're talking about May of 2021. Chronic stress might stay up, but alpha amylase might not. Acute stress, right? These kids are going through homeschool for some of them for the first time in their life. They're living with COVID. They've got all kinds of challenges going on. We're talking about anxiety, right? We're literally triggering them in conversation and then teaching coping skills, right? So their cortisol may not change. And some of them it did, that's awesome. But we anticipated that cortisol may not change. But we hoped that alpha amylase would, that we would get that immediate reaction, right? And the oxytocin. We did see that across the board in many of the weeks. We used a linear mixed methods modeling to assess if the riding the same horse affected the bonding, and we actually found it did not. Riding the same horse did not have a significant impact. Now, our riders, though, and these were all our consistent riders, also don't come here with the expectation of riding the same horse. So surprise, but like also not really a surprise. So it's something to dig a little deeper into. I saw the look of surprise. So something to dig a little deeper into for sure.
So you tested both riding the same horse versus not riding the same?
Yes.
And did it affect the horse differently?
It did not. No. So here it didn't. I would be very interested if there was another program where they always rode the same horse, compare our program, compare that program, and then see what we find. Because our horses don't have that expectation, nor do our humans, right? It's just kind of how we roll. But it would be really interesting to either have like brandy new humans and see what happens, or that kind of a model. When we looked at our volunteers, because yes, we made our volunteers spit too, and I will tell you, the kids are so much easier to make spit than volunteers. Gosh, yes, that is very true. Pre-post changes of volunteers over time, again, linear mixed models effect, were performed to test or oxytocin and cortisol in particular at 4 time points, 1, 4, 7, and 10. Overall changes of the data collection, the oxytocin was only significant at week 7. So basically it was not significant, let's just go with no. But we do see some trending, right? We see a trend in oxytocin and we see a trend for cortisol. Now, why would we see an increase in stress and an increase in oxytocin in our volunteers? We had a very good postulation for this. What do you guys think?
They were being studied.
Maybe. Who also volunteers in a class? Who like leads with a student? Okay. What do you, not to put you on the spot. What do you think about your role as a volunteer? Yeah, you take your job seriously, right? Yes, you're volunteering, and do you love it? Yeah, and do you feel good when you do it? Absolutely, but you gotta keep them safe, right? Yeah, we are physiologically complex creatures, and so our volunteers are feeling mixed messages all at the same time. We got mixed messages all at the same time. That's what we were postulating is happening here. Saliva from horses. I love this. So again, linear mixed methods were performed at the 4 time points, 1, 4, 7, and 10. We tested them before they went in the ring. We tested them after they came out of the ring. They wore the bit for 90 seconds, which is the same amount of time as it should take to spit into a tube. Kids, 90 seconds. Adults, eh. So there's no evidence that the oxytocin or cortisol changes over time statistically. However, we do also see that trending data. Our trend goes up for the horses. Our trend does go up for cortisol. Our average age of horse is 25 and they're working. We would expect to see some cortisol, right? Like that. If I didn't see some stress in their bodies, I'd be like, something's off here. But to see a little bit of an increase in oxytocin, to me, totally anthropomorphizing, so veterinarians, I'm sorry. Do they love their job? Maybe, right? Is there something, maybe, right? Maybe they love coming out of the ring and it's the after effect that we're getting. I don't know. But there's something in there that is a release of oxytocin. There's physiologically a release of oxytocin happening. That is interesting, if nothing else. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Could it be that they're finally realizing that the session is over and now they feel like, yeah, this is finally a
I mean, it could be, but if we're measuring it pre and post,
because we know they're going into it.
yeah.
You know,
Yes, it could.
Today's Tuesday, it's when those kids are done.
It could be. I don't know, I didn't ask you that question.
Could it be more simple that a bit promotes salivation if it's not being consumed? Like, I'm thinking of a pacifier.
Yeah.
Or a horse that licks a salt block. You see that kind of,
Yes.
that facial expression that says, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't get that. We did actually do some observation, and we didn't get that kind of a reaction from any of our horses, which would be funny. The one that actually ate the one bit that we then were like, oh, we should modify this and probably not use him again. We got a reaction like that. The other ones, not so much. They more just like don't care, or the affect is don't care. It's interesting, and it's possible. It's definitely possible that just having an oral fixation releases something, but it does take time to release oxytocin, and it should take more than 90 seconds. So something should have been released in the time that they were in the lesson to then come out and capture that. So it might be that they're leaving the lesson, but something was released during the time they were in the lesson. Can I jump back and then come up? Yes.
I've heard many, many times growing up with horses, they love a job.
Yeah.
They like work. They need a purpose.
Yeah.
They need a buddy. They're social animals.
Absolutely.
And so whatever it is, that's also part of it. Our horses are allowed to work or not work. We have that luxury
Yeah.
for them. And we have horses that when their client comes, if that horse is on vacation, that horse is like, dude, hi, am I
Yeah.
working? I'm ready. And we're like, no, babe, you're on vacation. And she's like, this would be vacation.
Yeah.
Right? And so there may be some part of that social component for horses that they're doing something different. There's
And
a
that to me
novelty
is
to
affiliative
it.
bonding. That's an element of affiliative bonding for sure. I'm supposed to be with you. Definitely.
But you didn't have the horses paired up with the same rider.
No.
So it should take multiple interactions to form a relationship, to form a bond. Now, we'd like to be able to say oxytocin increased because they had a bond with their person.
But it could also, oxytocin does not necessarily require a bond. It could be interaction. Oxytocin can be released just through animal interaction. We've seen that through work of Pendry and the dogs on campus studies, things like that. So I would love to think that a bond would lead to statistically significant results versus trending data, but it shouldn't necessarily be.
Because horses generalize also.
Mm-hmm.
So if they like a person, or in general they like it when a person is there because they get something positive from it.
Yeah.
In general,
Right.
you're gonna generalize, and then.
Oh, I like this. I'll
Think
keep doing it. Yeah.
positively about humans.
Yes.
And then there's the theory of a safe haven,
Mm-hmm.
that a human is a safe haven.
Yeah.
So there again, we're back to a lot of
Can I add to
complexity.
that?
Yeah.
So a lot of our horses may have had the same volunteer leading, so that may be a
Yeah.
bonding piece as well for the horse.
Yeah.
But the student may have changed, but it may have been the same volunteer. So I just wanted
And
to
that's
throw
why we
that-
included the volunteers.
So I just want to throw that back into the mix when we were
Mhm.
talking about bonding and the horses. It'd be a volunteer if they were off, so there may have been weeks that it was a different volunteer too.
Right.
So it wasn't just two, there was usually a group of three with the volunteer, the student, and the horse, so.
And the volunteers were more consistent with the horses than the students were that were riding the horse. So that is true. And that's part of the reason we had them is we have anecdotally seen that our volunteers' energy has a very big impact on our horses. And so we've included them.
And sometimes the crap is the horse gets groomed by that volunteer.
Oh, it does. Yeah, here we definitely do. Yeah, absolutely. And then fidelity was our last question, right? Could we deliver this with fidelity? And absolutely yes. Fidelity across all sessions was 97%, which is incredibly high. We used the original fidelity checklist for each of the sessions that are in the manuals that are going around. Each instructor literally had a researcher outside the gate watching them teach their entire lesson for months and months. And they were very kind about it. And so we rated 141 sessions. There were 141 sessions were completed. 136 were actually rated as to whether or not that element was completed. And of that, 97% was completed with fidelity. So, something that you can deliver. The last piece that we did, and this is actually where we struggled the most, to be honest, we had journals for the kids. Then we asked them to go home and, take what you learned in your lesson today and complete this journal. And our parents said, no thanks, they do enough homework. I don't want to. We also had parent debrief sessions. After each lesson, we'd have them come in and say, hey, do you want to come in and learn about what your students learned today and what we did and all this? And Shelly, what did they say?
Oh, no thanks, I'm good, I'll just stay in the car.
Yeah. So we've learned that we are respite for the parents. They know their kids are safe with us. They hang in the car. We were like, please, we're doing a research study. I need you to come inside. And we probably got 85% of parents to engage. We got less to complete the journal. So that was definitely a challenge. And in a replication, the biggest recommendation is to make these digital. So overall, Sampling of saliva in social science research, totally viable, highly recommend. Needs a lot of finessing and partnership, and dig into it. One of the things that we've been talking about, Dr. Chrisman and I, I keep saying alpha amylase in the human side. Well, it's because we tested it in the horses, and I literally got zeros for readings. And I'm like, but why? Right? It would be fine to have a reading and not have it be reliable, but we didn't get any reading, and that's fascinating to me. So what is going on there? So digging in more to those different analytes and what's going on. Participant cortisol levels consistently decreased. Oxytocin increased at 2 out of the 4 time points. Horses had no evidence of increased significant stress by participation in the Reining and Anxiety program. Yes, by their participation in riding. Volunteers, not significant stress, positive trend for oxytocin. Horse and rider consistency did not affect the bonding or stress. And that Reining and Anxiety is effective intervention for children 6 to 17 with mild to moderate anxiety. Overall, we certainly had limitations around ethnicity, right? Age distribution. We did have 3 students with attrition, but overall not bad. Herd considerations, we had one horse in the herd pass away during the actual study, so there's some, herd considerations. We had one horse that had an abscess, and we had to change out parental engagement being a big one, and then saliva sampling. Also just, COVID was a precaution. Next steps overall, we are looking to expand this and have kind of a multi-site study. So we're talking about doing a K-23 award, trying to get multi-site through NIHD or NIH Child Development. Considering including heart rate variability or some other biomarkers that would track with the physiological indicators. Figuring out that alpha amylase piece, adapting Reining and Anxiety for other age groups. I have some veterans who would love to dig into this. The current language in the journals and in the manual are not appropriate, but those coping cards sure are. So figuring out how to adapt this. And then a general research agenda that kind of brings this into the broader scope of EAS as well. So, you have a couple minutes? Yay! My last piece of show and tell I'm going to pass around. These are the actual session cards that our instructors had on their physical bodies that go through each of the lessons as well. So I'll pass these around, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I think I have about 5 minutes. Yes?
So when you designed the program, I'm curious why you decided to include mountain work as opposed to doing something that's just ground work. Since riding is potentially more anxiety-provoking for some people.
So the transparent answer is actually there was an original grant that had ground and riding. And then we were like, oh my God, the number of controls. So when we look at Fieldstone's programming, we have in our private students about 15 6 to 16-year-olds in ground programming. I have about 100 mounted students. So population-wise, it was easier to get the research in and going for mounted, and we could still do controls. So that was the easier place to start. But now knowing the controls, and when people say, I just walk in the barn and feel better, we have to do ground as well as mounted. The research has to do that. And I've been looking at that for years now, and it's absolutely true. Yeah?
Someone was asking before what we need from research. We need more of that, specifically. Ground. There's so much more for mounted work than for ground.
Yeah.
This is kind of pulling from
You're good.
the past, so here we go. Alpha and beta amylase, if I remember correctly, and I make it pump from the vets in the room, are aids with digestion.
Yes.
And digestion and absorption, specifically enzyme breakdown, leads to differences in nutrition,
Yes.
which can speak to better
Yes.
thoughts.
Can you repeat the question?
No. If you were to take this through a holistic lens, and we actually look at the foundational true use of alpha amylase being like a digestive aid, could we actually look at somebody's overall health and well-being by looking at alpha amylase as well? So can it actually tell us more about a person's well-being beyond just stress and anxiety, right? Is that kind of?
So amylase is an enzyme that helps break down foods, and it specifically goes to enzyme breakdown. And so when you get more enzyme, the enzyme breaks down into more amino acids. The amino acids through that digestion leads to better uptake, baby formulas, right? The more you can break it down, the easier absorbed it is. If you can actually absorb more of the nutrients that you're eating, would you have less ulcers, less gastric, better health, more cognitive ability to do nutritional increases? Is that another marker that could actually be measured and quantitated?
Not necessarily in horses, because it's gonna depend upon what feed they ate and when they ate it in relation to the sample, because of the short half-life of the metabolites analog. So you could do the same study, but if the horses were fed a different diet, different amounts, or within different times before they were sampled, you're gonna get different results.
Well, that stinks, yes.
So the fun thing for us, though, is we were actually able to control for a lot of that because our horses get fed the same thing at the same time every single day. So we actually were able to control for that, for feed here. And yet I still had no alpha amylase readings, but yes.
And they get routine blood work.
Correct, they do get routine blood work. Yes.
Forget if you mentioned it or not,
Yeah.
but were your participants typically developing or?
Most have some other compounding disabilities, and we were able to control for the disabilities in the statistical analysis. Yes.
Do they all have anxiety disorder diagnosis?
No, self-reported by the parents. So they did this 2-question screening and the global questionnaire. So they had to score, one is a 2-question, so basically does your kid have anxiety? And then the other one is how about their global functioning. And they had to rank at least a certain score or higher to participate. So it didn't have to be a formal diagnosis. And a lot of that is because that's honestly how our program runs. Like, if a parent says, my kid is on the spectrum, and we don't say, give us the diagnosis, right? They fill out our paperwork. So it didn't seem right to say, like, you have prove it.
Okay, good.
Thank you.